You remember those early pandemic days? Empty shelves, delayed packages, prices inching up on everything from toilet paper to toys. We were told it was temporary, just a blip in the global supply chain. And eventually things did settle, or so it seemed. But what if I told you that what we experienced during COVID was just the warm-up act? That behind the scenes, a new storm is quietly brewing, one not caused by a virus or global panic, but by policy. Political decisions, tariffs, and trade tensions are now doing what a global pandemic once did, halting shipments, gutting supply chains, and raising the cost of living for millions of Americans. Let me give you a glimpse. 70 cargo ships canceled. A 170 pair of sneakers now costs $350. Jobs disappearing on the docks in Los Angeles. Truckers hauling half-empty containers. This isn't speculation, it's already happening. And the craziest part? We're barely talking about it. Today, we're going deep. We'll unpack the numbers no one wants to look at, like the 35% to 50% drop in imports hitting America's busiest ports. We'll talk about who gets hurt first: dock workers, small business owners, and everyday families. We'll explore why China has all but stopped shipping certain goods to the U.S. Is it retaliation or a strategic withdrawal? And we'll revisit the timeline of tariff decisions, tracing it back to 2018 to understand how we got here. We'll compare what matters more to American households: the price of gasoline or the doubling cost of daily goods like strollers, shoes, and toys. Spoiler alert, it's not as simple as some would like you to think. And finally, we'll zoom out, because this isn't just about the U.S. and China. Countries like Vietnam and Mexico are watching closely, adapting, and in some cases, profiting. The global supply chain is shifting beneath our feet. So if you've felt lately like your paycheck isn't stretching as far, or that something's off with the economy, even though the headlines say otherwise, you're not imagining it. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand not only what's happening and why, but also what it means for you, your family, and the choices ahead. Here's something that might surprise you. What's happening at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach right now is already worse than the darkest days of the COVID-era supply chain crisis. Think about that for a moment. Back then, it was a global health emergency that froze everything. Today, it's policy. Decisions made in Washington and echoed in Beijing are canceling 70 sailings, leaving ports eerily quiet, and leaving truckers, dock workers, and logistics managers scrambling for answers. Let's talk numbers, because the data is the story here. At the Port of Long Beach, officials were expecting 17 vessels this week. They got 3. That's an 82% drop, staggering by any measure. Gene Soroka, the executive director at the Port of LA, has warned that imports could drop by 35%, maybe more. Why? Because shipments from China have essentially ceased. And it's not just about China turning off the tap, it's importers pulling back too. Why risk shipping something when you might get slapped with a 145% tariff? Here's a real-world example. A pair of sneakers that used to cost $175 now costs $350 just because of tariff changes. Not because the materials doubled. Not because of labor costs, just taxes. Now multiply that impact across thousands of products, from clothing to electronics to furniture, and you start to see the ripple effect. Retailers hesitate to place new orders. Warehouse demand drops. Jobs in shipping and logistics vanish, not with a bang, but a slow fizzle. And it's not just about the workers at the docks. This hits Main Street too. Small businesses trying to stock shelves for spring and summer are coming up short. A friend of mine runs a small home goods store in Ohio. She told me last week she had to cancel a summer product line because the margins vanished overnight. She couldn't raise prices enough to cover the new import costs without driving away her loyal customers. That's the kind of quiet economic pain that doesn't make headlines, but it's real, and it's happening. For many Americans, especially those who've lived through recessions, housing crises, and job outsourcing, this might feel like deja vu. But this time, it's not just market forces. It's man-made, and that makes it even more frustrating. So why aren't we talking about this more? Because unless you work in logistics or small retail, you don't see the empty docks. You only notice when that item you want is suddenly twice as expensive or just not there. Let's keep going. Because to really understand how we got here, we need to look at the policies behind these numbers and ask some hard questions about whether they're working and who they're really serving. You might not think about it when you click Buy Now or walk into your local store, but every single container that doesn't arrive means someone doesn't get paid. Someone's shift gets cut, a truck stays parked, a back room stays empty. This part of the story often goes untold, but it's where the human cost of these trade policies becomes painfully clear. Let's start at the docks. The ILWU, the union representing West Coast dock workers, reported that over 500 part-time workers in Long Beach alone have seen their hours reduced by nearly half. And it's not just the ports, it ripples outward. Truckers are among the first to feel it. Fewer containers mean fewer loads. Fewer loads mean less money. Independent owner-operators, who don't have the cushion of a large fleet, are especially vulnerable. I spoke with a driver named Luis from San Bernardino. He used to haul 3 loads a day from the ports. Now he's lucky if he gets one. He told me, "I can't plan anything. Some days I don't know if I'll work until the morning of. I've got a mortgage, 2 kids, and right now I'm just trying to stay afloat." Luis isn't alone. Then come the small retailers. They're not just faceless stores in a mall. They're often family-run shops where the owner knows your name. And when shipping delays hit and costs double, many of these small businesses are left out of the conversation. Take Susan's Books and Gifts in Oregon. She used to order decorative items and toys from suppliers that source from China. Now she's cutting entire categories from her store because she can't justify the 40–60% markup forced by tariffs and freight costs. Worse, her customers are frustrated, and she's the one left explaining a policy she didn't make. Here's what I find deeply frustrating. We always hear, "Buy American, protect our industries," and I get that, I really do. But when the strategy becomes so blunt that it hurts the people it's supposed to protect, maybe it's time to rethink the playbook. You can't build a strong economy by hollowing out the working backbone of it. People like Louise and Susan, they're not footnotes. They are the story. This isn't about politics. It's about dignity. It's about whether we value the people who keep the economy running, even when headlines move on. And here's where it gets even more interesting. These impacts aren't just the result of some recent hiccup. They've been building for years, driven by a deliberate shift in trade policy. So next, let's take a step back and look at how we got here. From the tariffs of 2018 to today's economic squeeze. Sometimes in life, silence says more than words. And when China slows its shipping to the U.S., the message isn't just economic, it's political. But here's the real question. Is China retreating or retaliating? On the surface, it might look like hesitation. The Chinese government has cited economic headwinds and weak U.S. consumer demand as reasons for pulling back. Some analysts suggest factories are operating at reduced capacity and shipping fewer goods is a logical outcome. But when you look closer, the pattern feels more strategic than circumstantial. Take this. Since 2023, Beijing has quietly restructured its global trade priorities. They've increased exports to Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, while cutting shipments to the U.S. and in a move that barely made headlines here, China reinstated certain retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural goods, from soybeans to pork. This isn't random. This is chess. In response to Trump's original tariffs in 2018, China initially played defense. Now they're back on offense, rebalancing trade flows, redirecting exports, and sending a message that they can pivot their economy without us. And let's not forget the political theater. State-run media in China has been painting the U.S. as an unreliable trading partner. They're reinforcing a narrative that trade with America carries strategic risk, something that has resonance in Beijing's current push for dual circulation, a strategy to boost domestic demand and reduce reliance on Western markets. Now, let me step back and say this. I'm not defending China's playbook, but I do believe we need to understand it. Because if we keep interpreting every move as weakness, we'll misread the board. It's not just about dollars and tariffs, it's about leverage. And this tug of war has very real consequences here at home. When supply slows from one of the world's largest manufacturing engines, it sends aftershocks through everything from our housing construction materials to toy store shelves. And if we continue this game of tit-for-tat tariffs without strategy, we risk hurting our own consumers more than our competitors. Personally, I think we need to stop pretending this is 1985. The global economy has changed. The players are smarter. And the stakes? They're not just financial, they're geopolitical. So where does that leave us? We've seen the impact on workers, on businesses, and now the political motivations from abroad. But how did we get locked into this cycle in the first place? To answer that, we've got to rewind a few years, back to the trade war that started it all. Let's break down how we went from a few tariffs in 2018 to a full-scale supply chain standoff. What started with a tweet turned into a global trade war. Let's rewind to 2018, a year that feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Back then, President Trump announced tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, citing national security concerns under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. To many, it felt abrupt. But if you'd been listening closely to his 2016 campaign, the warning signs were all there. He wasn't just talking about bringing back jobs. He was declaring war on what he called unfair trade. China was target number one. By July 2018, the administration had slapped 25% tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. China responded in kind, targeting American soybeans, pork, and automobiles. It didn't stop there. Over the next year, the tariff list ballooned to cover over $370 billion in Chinese imports, affecting everything from solar panels to sneakers. It became less about steel and more about leverage. Some in the administration, like U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, saw tariffs as a legitimate tool to pressure Beijing into structural reform. Others, it seemed, used them more as political theater. And let's be honest, the message played well in parts of the country that had watched manufacturing disappear over decades. But here's where things got messy. Instead of reshoring those jobs, many companies simply shifted production to Vietnam, Mexico, or other lower-cost countries. The global supply chain didn't come back home, it just rerouted. American consumers, we started paying more, quietly, gradually at the register. And while the administration celebrated toughness, the trade deficit with China didn't actually shrink in a meaningful or sustained way. In fact, by 22, it hit a new record high. So what really drove the strategy? Some say it was rooted in economic nationalism, a belief that we should protect domestic industry no matter the markets. Others argue it was pure posturing, part of a larger geopolitical stance designed to rally voters and rattle allies and adversaries alike. In truth, it was probably both. Here's my take. I believe in fair trade. I believe in standing up to abusive practices. But policy needs precision, not just pressure. And when we impose sweeping tariffs without clear end goals, the pain doesn't just hit Beijing, it hits Bakersfield and Baltimore too. And now, in 2020, we're living with the ripple effects of decisions made 7 years ago. Higher prices, weakened supply chains, and a new Cold War, fought with containers instead of tanks. So if we want to chart a better course forward, we first need to ask, do these tariffs actually work? Let's take a closer look at the real cost to American families, beyond politics, beyond headlines, in the next section. What's the price of a doll or a pair of sneakers? To some, it may sound trivial, something only the media or urban elites would fuss over. But when you double the price of everyday goods, the pain hits every household, not just those shopping for toys. Let's start with that $175 pair of shoes. Post-tariff, the same shoes now cost $350 due to a 145% import tax. That's not a designer splurge. That's a high schooler's back-to-school shoes or a restaurant worker replacing worn-out non-slip footwear. And when that price jump happens across dozens of products, it adds up fast. Trump once dismissed the impact by saying, "We're talking about dolls and strollers. It's not like people need those." But let's pause right there. If you've ever raised kids, or even helped someone who has, you know those things aren't luxuries. They're staples. Strollers aren't just baby gear, they're mobility. Dolls aren't just toys, they're comfort, emotional learning, and for some children, a tool to process a chaotic world. And it's not just consumer goods. Energy, too, has been affected, despite the claim that lower gas prices balance things out. That's only part of the story. Increased costs in shipping, materials, and manufacturing due to trade tension ripple into energy-intensive sectors. That means higher electricity bills, inflated HVAC repair costs, and longer lead times for replacement parts. Here's where the human element really matters. Small businesses, already operating on razor-thin margins, now have to choose. Do they pass those costs on to customers, or do they eat the losses and risk closing shop? I spoke recently with a friend who runs a small bike repair store in Ohio. Their replacement parts, once $25 wholesale, so now clock in at nearly $50. He's lost regulars because prices went up, and he's sleeping less, worrying more. And then there's household budgeting. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, as tens of millions of Americans still are, you notice when shampoo goes up by $1. You feel it when groceries jump by $10 more, and when essentials like diapers or school supplies become harder to afford, the pressure isn't theoretical. It's relentless. From my own experience, growing up in a working-class household, every price shift mattered. Every time the cost of something increased, something else had to go. That's the reality for a lot of families still. So no, these aren't just dolls, they're indicators. They're symptoms of deeper structural strain, and we can't afford to shrug them off because they don't seem serious enough. Coming up, let's look at where this is all going, because the pain we're feeling now might just be the beginning. What happens next in the global supply chain, and how long could it take to recover? What if I told you that a trade war with China might be helping Vietnam? Or Mexico, that behind the headlines of canceled shipments and rising prices, there's a quiet rebalancing happening across the globe. Because when the world's two largest economies start locking horns, everyone else adjusts their position. Here's what's happening. As tariffs and tensions push American companies to reconsider their dependency on China, many are looking elsewhere. Vietnam, for example, has become a rising star in manufacturing. Apple now assembles some of its AirPods and iPads there. Nike and Adidas have shifted parts of their supply chains out of China and into Southeast Asia. And Mexico, our neighbor just across the border, is stepping up with increased automotive, electronics, and textile production. This isn't a coincidence, it's a redirection. Companies are hedging their bets, spreading risk, and adapting to political uncertainty. But let's be clear, this isn't as simple as flipping a switch. Moving a factory is a massive, expensive undertaking. It takes time retraining workers, establishing logistics routes, and reworking supplier relationships. So even though some countries are benefiting in the long run, the transition is bumpy, and it's not just businesses adapting. Governments are responding too. Vietnam has ramped up infrastructure investment and trade deals to position itself as a dependable alternative. Mexico is leaning into the USMCA framework, attracting more foreign direct investment with promises of proximity and predictability. Even countries like India and Indonesia are starting to see small spikes in foreign manufacturing interest. But here's what's often overlooked. There's still only one Earth. No matter where the goods are made, the materials still have to come from somewhere. Rare earth elements, steel, chips, they're all part of a tangled web. So rerouting the supply chain doesn't erase our global interdependence. It just reshuffles who we depend on. From a consumer standpoint, this might not seem relevant, but I'd argue it's essential, because who we trade with and how affects not only prices, but also job markets, global stability, and national security. And I believe we need to think long-term, not just in election cycles or quarterly profits. As someone who's watched friends in manufacturing get laid off while tech jobs soar in other regions, I've seen what imbalance looks like. Globalization isn't new, but the way we steer it now will define the next decade. So yes, Vietnam is watching, Mexico is watching, and they're not just watching, They're preparing, adapting, and stepping up. Which brings us to a final question. Where does America go from here? In our last segment, let's talk about the future, how we fix what's broken and rebuild stronger. So let's recap what we've just walked through. The price hikes are real. $175 shoes now costing $350 isn't just an inconvenience, it's a signal of deeper economic shifts. The political choices driving these changes matter. The tariffs, the trade wars, the adjustments across the globe. These aren't just abstract concepts. They affect your wallet, your and your future. We've seen how entire industries are being reshaped, from dock workers losing jobs to small retailers getting squeezed. But here's the bigger question. Is this the economy you voted for? If not, it's time to take action. You don't have to sit back and watch the world shift around you. You can make a difference by staying informed, engaging in the conversations that matter, and speaking up when it counts. The decisions we make today will shape tomorrow, not just in policy, but in the lives of ordinary people. So what can you do? Share this video. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Don't let this just be another headline you scroll past. Engage with the world around you and hold the powers that be accountable. This isn't just about politics. It's about your future, your economy, and the future of your country. Speak up, stay informed, and be the change you want to see.